were times when I got in the mud, got in the water, and I hated it, absolutely hated it. And I'd just get out and shake my hands, and Baldy'd be laughing at me on the boat, and I'm standing there with my arms up going, I'm a nurse, not a ruddy river rat. But as time went by, I grew to enjoy it out there. It's become a big part of our life now.
We had a canoe club at Whanganui High School when I went to school. There was only about 3 or 4 of us, and that school teacher, Stan Davis, got me interested in going down the Whanganui River, and then that sort of got my attention for the river. This is my arbor, and this is where it all started from, but the Maoris were here first.
In ancient times, there stood at Taupo, in the centre of this island, a group of powerful mountains. Greatest of these was Tongariro. His wife was Pihanga, whom Tongariro tenderly sheltered from the east and west wind. One day, the mountain Taranaki fell in love with Pihanga, and the other mountain gods were angry and spouted flame and smoke. The thunder god growled at Taranaki, and as Taranaki hurried from his angry brothers, he left a deep scar in the earth.
The Maoris, they lived beside it. It was like their highway. See it as a living thing. They want to protect it. It's sort of like their home, and they use it for source of food. And it's like you have rules that you sort of respect. The Maoris are basically almost born on a canoe. The canoe to the Maori was like a car is to us nowadays. They were basically natural canoeists. They understood all the currents and how to read water. The Maoris have got a saying, I am the river and the river is me. And that's how I feel as well. I went up there when I was very young, going to school. And it just sort of gets hold of you somehow. We used to go from Papariki down, and then we used to get a session in the library, and I was just looking through books to read, and the paddle wheels book caught my eye, and I thought, oh, that looks interesting. I've been in the river, and I see what this book's about. So then I started reading it, and as I got into it, I just kept reading it, and then I couldn't put the bloody thing down. It was their sense of humour and the excitement of the boats. I'd been for a ride on the Whanganui a few years earlier, and really loved that. That was just around the town bridge, when the town bridge was opened, early 70s, I think. Dad said, go up on the bridge, you might get to go driving the boat. So I went up on the bridge, and Dave Upchurch, he was driving it, and he said, hey mate, do you want to have a go at driving? I said, oh yeah, I'd love to. So I had to go on the wheel. That was a big deal for a small kid at school. When I left school, I had a good schoolmate, Les Russell, and Les and I used to canoe together all over in the Rangitik and the Whanganui mainly. And then both of us decided it'd be more fun if we had more people to paddle with. So we put an ad in the paper to form a canoe club, which we did, and it ended up being the biggest whitewater club in the country, River City Canoe Club. The river's always had an attraction to me, so I started doing guiding trips down the Whanganui for free. As part of the canoe club's drive to get new members, then a couple of mates that were doing slalom decided to do it commercially, start charging, and I tried to talk the canoe club into making money out of it, but no one was that keen on it, because the Whanganui is only grade 1 and 2. And I said, well, stuff it, I'd love to come down the river. If you guys aren't interested, I'm doing it on my own. So I started doing guided trips and charging. I supplied the canoes and transport, food, tents, basically bring your own sleeping bag. I bought the canoes, it cost me a small fortune. A mixture of kayaks and Canadian canoes. I actually prefer the Canadian canoes myself. A lot more leisurely way to sit in the river. You can carry more gear, check a sack of spuds in and camp ovens, and if the customers are on the Canadian, they've got waterproof barrels with their clothes and sleeping bags and that. It's tied into the boat, so if the boat does go over, the gear stays dry.
A friend of mine, Clive, and I decided to do something different for the summer periods. Eventually we hit on the idea of joining the canoe club, and that's where I first met Baldy, was with joining the canoe club. First experience was we brought the kayaks, all the gear, and then he said, oh, we're off to the Whanganui River, come for a trip. Yeah, why not? Talk about throw you in the deep end. We went over a small waterfall, about 10 foot, got through all that, and eventually ended up smashing my kayak wrapped around a rock. Baldy said, it's all right, we can fix that, not a problem. And a couple of days later, Robert came round with a bit of fiberglass, bit of matting, and yeah, fix. So here's my brand new kayak that my pride and joy. Suddenly he's got beaten up, and he says, now you look like a river rat. Then my interest for canoeing grew. When Robert was heading to the World Champs, he decided that he was going to canoe up the Whanganui River. We'd never been on the Whanganui River, so didn't know what it was like. We met Robert up there at Tamaranui, and then we as a group canoed down. Baldy started a business up, bringing guided trips down the Whanganui River. We as mates then became guides for him. I did it for about 9 years, canoeing. We did it for the fun of it. It was really good times. Some of the interesting things that happened on the river on some of these trips sort of live in your memories a long time. I remember a program on TV called Gliding On, and the Welshman actor Ray Hemwood, him and his wife came down. Found out that his wife's a High Court judge, and if you could imagine, they were the upper echelon of high society, yet they were down at our level, and they thoroughly enjoyed their trip. So we got to meet a variety of people. We met people from overseas. I remember 2 particular German girls. We were at what we called the clifftop site, and Robert's telling stories about the possums. We had wandered off out into the bush just to make sure that things were secure around the campsite. And I said, let's just drop something behind these 2 German girls. And we dropped something behind them, and they nearly crapped themselves because they thought it was a possum had landed down beside them. The trips were a 5-day trip. The guides got all the tents and campsites set up. Baldy was just the mouthpiece. So if you ever wanted anything done, you always came to the guides. But then everyone listened to Baldy for the stories on the river. Because he's got a great knowledge about the river and the stories he can tell about it. Whenever we were cooking big meals and that for big parties, you've got to remember we're cooking on a campfire. We've got cast iron pots for cooking the roast potatoes, the meat, etc. And then Baldy says, we've got to have mixed herbs in it. So for 5 days, we were trying to keep his mixed herbs out of the meals. But if you left the cooking to us guides, we knew what we were doing, and yeah, it was good fun. And it was actually a good feeling because there was a lot of people, there's 30 people on the river, and you were the only ones on that river. Nowadays, if you come down the river, it's like a main highway. You're always bumping into other canoe parties.
I've been canoeing down the river for a long time, and I got to know Ken and Rowan House, and they bought Whanganui Jet Tours, which also owned the Waireka and a couple of jet boats. He was short of jet boat drivers, but I'd never driven a jet boat before, so I need a crash lesson in driving a jet boat. So we hopped in and said, right, turn the key and bury the boot, and off we go. So I went down to the down bridge, did a few turns and went back and said, right, you can drive a boat, away you go. Then I had to go to Trevor Gibson, the harbour master, and pass a boatmaster's thing, which I did a couple of days later. And then I was a fully qualified jet boat driver. And then I started driving jet boats, so I'd take them around the bridges and do a few fast turns in and out the bridge piles, and they'd get a big thrill and we'd get a few bucks. And I'd have some fun. And then he mentioned the Waireka. I'd have to give him a local launchmaster's ticket for that. I did a course with Trevor Gibson to give me a ticket, and I could only drive the Waireka, and I could only drive it on the Whanganui River. We were doing trips up to U Park Pub and up to Pango Park, and it was actually quite busy. It stopped when I moved to Nelson.
Baldy came in and done one of the boatmaster's courses to get a bit more knowledge. And that's when he was running canoe trips down the river with his Canadian canoes, and then he built the Adventurer. It made things a little bit easier. Everybody in the one vessel. Prior to that, he was on the Waireka for a while. He went up and got another ticket. I can't think of anybody knowing as much about the river as he does. I'd go with him any time. I first came to Whanganui, 1948, when I was at sea on the coast. Came here and met the wife-to-be and went away to sea again. But I've been in and out prior to that, backwards and forwards. I started here in 58 and then got a job at the Harbour Board. I had 5 years on the pilot staff, 17 years skippering the dredge, and 8 years as harbour master, port captain. We had our coasters until the rail ferries arrived, and that's what killed the coasters. Well, we had Northern Company, Anchor Company, Canterbury Company, Home and Co. They were all working here, in and out, plus the cheese boats from Patia were coming in and out in the early days. Well, the son started in Sea Cadets, so I ended up Sea Cadets. And then my neighbour, who was a fisherman, said, well, will you take us for our inshore fishing skippers tickets? So for 5 years I tutored local fishermen. And then there was a knock on the door one night, would I take Coast Guard courses? And that was in 1980. There's nothing new in the marine world today that wasn't thought of back in the early days. Driving the Waimarie, I call her the mistress. She's got a mind of her own. She does what she wants to do at times. Takes a lot of upkeep. She's not conventional. You've got no propeller. And the fact that you're getting water across the rudder to give you more steerage. Your paddles forward and midships. One digs a little bit deeper than the other. You come around a bend, you get the wind on a different quarter. Tide on another quarter. If you don't watch it, she'll be doing a U-E on you. You're thinking ahead the whole time.
What happened was every man and his dog realised there was money hiding down the Whanganui River, so we had anyone from car salesmen to possum trappers to just Joe Blood person with no experience was guiding people down the Whanganui River. And I thought, well, it's not going to work when they're undercutting at a bit of a price war going on. So I thought I'll build a boat because that's a bigger asset and it'll cut out the guys that don't really want to do it. I basically wanted to marry a canoe and I built the Adventurer 1. At that stage I was in Nelson doing marine maintenance for Northern Boodles and I got a big mate of their boat designer, and over a beer at work I said to him I wouldn't mind building a steel canoe and do trips down the Whanganui River. He said, I'll tell you what, I'll make a model and get back to you. So he made a model and we had a bit of a think about it. He did some drawings and that, and then I said to my wife, I've got to get back on that river because I'm sort of basically homesick and I wanted to come home. The river's always been the place when things are going bad for me. It's my happy place. I went and seen my mate at Romans down, it was the foreman there, and told him what I was doing, and he said, well, I could do it for a bit of a hand here, I'll do a deal with you. And then I worked for free and they bought all the steel and the jet unit and the motor and everything. The canoe trips them days were 5 days. To do it probably needed 5 days. And I thought, well, the people with most of the money are working during the week, so I need to do a weekend trip. So I decided, yeah, I'll do a weekend trip from Whakaroa to about Artney. I decided I'd finish at Artney because the bottom stretch is boring after you've done the top stretch, and it's better to get everyone off the boat when they're still happy and on a high. It was 34 feet and it was survey for 14 passengers, which wasn't really enough. It was very easy to drive. I could get it down when the jet boats weren't operating, but that was basically because I can read the water and they can't. When I was running the trips, I managed to make enough money to buy a farm out of Curia. In the end, I went through a marriage breakup and my ex said it's either the farm or the boat, you choose. I chose the farm because I thought at my age I needed to be sensible and go where the money is. And I wasn't making that much money out of the boat, it was just really just doing it because I love the river. I kept it for a while and just did mates trips where I don't charge it, they just pay the diesel. And that was it for a while. And then eventually I thought, too much money tied up, and then I got approached by the Maoris, by Puripi, if I wanted to sell it. And I said, well, actually I don't really want to sell it. And they said, well, we're offering to pay you good money for it. And I said, oh, well, can you give me a bit of time to think about it? So they gave me some time, and then they hassled me for a bit. And I thought, I'll stop it. I was busy doing gorse and fencing and farm work. I can't do them both, so I sold it. I was pig farming at my mate's place, and Josh basically said he'd been on a few of these mates' trips and said, you're pretty good at driving a boat. If you're interested in getting back on the river again, I said, well, yeah, I am actually. I wouldn't mind building a 40-footer. And he said, well, why don't you go the full hog and build a 60-footer like model is? I loved driving the Waireka, and that was really a dream of mine. And I thought, I'd love to build one of those, but I don't know, it's a big boat. And over a few more beers, I said, oh yeah, okay, we'll do it. The temptation to build a big boat was just too much for me. The Y82 was Hatrick's last shallow draft boat he had built. So I figured out they must have had all the problems sorted out by then. And so that's the one to copy. I'd already mentioned the big boat to Red, who did the small boat. He made a scar model up and put weights in it, and it needed to draw less than a foot and come out at 9 inches, which is what I wanted. And had all the drawings done, everything done, ready to go, but I just hadn't been able to find the money to build it. Josh and I decided to go halves in it, and I got divorced and sold the farm, bought a house in town, and sort of worked out town life is not really for Baldy. And then I decided I'll stuff it. It's only a house, I'll sell the house and that can pay for half a boat. So I sold the house. I bought some steel beams and levelled them up and got them the right width of the ribs and put the boat upside down on the steel beams. The welding on the boat's all pretty basic welding because I was a certified welder. We built it in Josh's backyard. It had about 10 acres and I built it in the paddock in 6 months. That's pretty quick, but it was 12-hour days and everything was pre-cut, ready to go. On the ventral 2, on the shear line, which is the top of the sides, is the same height as the Whitey 2, but I added another foot onto it underneath the windows, so I made it a lot safer. I had a marine architect to design all that superstructure, but he kept coming back with these modern designs, and I didn't want a modern design, I wanted it to look like an old boat. So I said to him, look mate, how about I build it and you come and do the drawings of what I built, otherwise this is going to cost too much money. It's a rock sideways, it can't fill up with water because it's watertight. And I've actually tested it against the rock wall, and it just sat there beautifully, didn't even waver, just sat there. We had a jet boat operator went past in a bit of a panic and thought we were in trouble, and he wanted me to get a line to him. I said, no, hang on mate, we're going to have a cup of coffee first. So we sat there to have a cup of coffee and then pulled it off with a winch. I could have got it off quicker, but it was safe, and I thought better to have a cup of coffee and settle everything down. It's very hard to break its back. When I launched it, I asked John Mahi, which is the local sort of bridge leader down this end, if he would bless it, and he agreed. It was a big deal in the media, the newspapers, and it was on the TV. Trip to Tamanui made the TV1 news, and there was a lot of publicity. And we just sort of rode that ride.
I first met Baldy at ballroom dancing. And from the first week we were partnered up together, and every week that I went, he was my partner. We kind of got to know each other throughout a whole year of dancing, and Rob was a bit of a slow mover, but you know, after a year he finally plucked up the courage to come over for coffee, so yeah, that was all good and away it went. He was just starting to build a riverboat in the paddock out at Okuia. So really didn't take much notice. He was very busy and, you know, we just sort of met at dancing. I had no interest in the river or anything. I just enjoyed Rob's company and we loved dancing together. He did his thing and I did mine, and occasionally I'd go on trips with him, like to U Park, Hapango Park. It wasn't until a couple of years ago when I actually went upriver on a bigger trip. It was absolutely awesome, and I could see why Baldy needed to be there. He belonged there. It was just beautiful up there. Rob became unwell and I had to assist him with a lot of things. Initially I was like his hands. I had to help him do a lot of maintenance stuff around the boats. I learnt how to tie up. I've adapted to being in the mud and the water, and so I guess you could say Baldy's got his way. I'm a river rat. Around April we had a group that wanted to get up to the bridge to nowhere, but we'd been in long drought conditions and low water levels for some time, and the trip had to be cancelled because we just couldn't get up there.
Down there.
We did get some rain not long after the cancellation, and within days it was all back on again, but we couldn't get that far, but we just did a day trip to Coronati and back. Just seeing him back out there doing those big trips, he was his old self, and spurred him on to wanting to do more, wanting to get further. He was anxious because it had been almost 2 years after. He'd gone off to do some welding on his previous boat, the Adventurer One, and he'd been away a couple of hours, and then I got a phone call from him saying, I'm in the same place as last time, and I'm thinking, oh no, I knew he'd in A&E. He had a bit of a scare with his heart about 6 months before that. So I tore off up there and it was pretty obvious that he'd had a stroke. When I got to the hospital, I was pretty distraught at what I'd seen. After a few hours, they were about to discharge Baldy because at that time they were just focusing on the fact that his heart had stabilised, and they didn't see what I had seen. They didn't recognise really that he'd had a stroke, and I insisted that we see another doctor because he was just about out the door by that time and not too happy that I kept him there. He was in hospital for about 3 weeks, much less than what he should have been, and for a good part of that time I used to sit beside him saying, you can't take him from me, we've just started a life together. He became very non-compliant, he wouldn't eat, he wouldn't take his medicines, he was a difficult patient. He spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to get out because he needed to get back to the awa and back to his boat. He kept crying out, I want my awa, I want my awa. He was very distraught about this happening, very angry, and I wanted to fight with him to help him to recover. And the sooner we got onto it, the quicker things started to happen. And it really didn't start happening until after he came out of hospital, really. When we got home, the river was a very big part in his recovery. It was very spiritual, it was very healing, and it gave him strength. He used to go down there every day, get in the hour, get on his boat, and every day came back and he was a bit stronger and a bit stronger. We battled it together, and it was a huge battle, very difficult. I gave it every shot that I could, and we worked hard together. We did physio, we did occupational therapy stuff. We did a lot of things to get the brain going again. Because he's a commercial operator, the assessments were pretty intense before Maritime New Zealand reissued his commercial launch master's licence. He went off to do an errand in town, and he was going to go to the bank and that, and when he came back he kept looking out the window and he kept saying to me, you better sit down, and I'm thinking, what? And I'm looking out the window and wondering what he's got up to, and I went, have you crashed the car? And he goes, you better sit down because I need to tell you something and you've got to come with me. He got me in the car eventually. He didn't tell me what he'd done, and he took me into the jeweller shop, and he'd already bought my rings and everything. And when they were actually sized and I could wear them, he just handed me the bag, and I just kept my arms crossed and waited for him to get on his knees and propose to me properly, which he found difficult, but he did it.
Ever since about 1950 I've been paddling the river more or less annually, and so I've seen it in all its moods at the summertime. Whanganui back in those days was a hotbed of scouting, and our scout people thought that it'd be a good idea to paddle the river, and so they organised it on a national basis. So we had about 20 going down on that first national scout canoe cruise, all the way from Taumarunui right down to Whanganui. They got bigger and bigger. We had 99 on the last one in the summer of 1957-58. Then I went overseas and no one carried on. So when I got back from the UK after 2 years, I took my own scouts down, and for the next 15 years I went down with various scout parties. Then I had a break. In 2000 I decided, look, if I'm going to paddle the river again, I'd better do it. And I've been doing it more or less annually ever since then. I'll be 82 in 1 month's time, and I want to carry on paddling it as long as I can. I hadn't known Baldy very much. I'd been out to see the boat being built. That's through things that had occurred on the internet that I'd read about, so I went out and saw the boat being built and sort of kept intermittent contact with Baldy. And when I came to Whanganui a couple of years ago now, he had his adventurer, which I'd seen parked on the bank of the river. A friend of mine, Heather Bonk, who lives up in Tauranga, she went on the inaugural trip on that boat right up to Taumarunui, which again was done in winter time. Had to be because the river was high. She said it was an experience not to be missed. So talking to Baldy recently, and he says he was planning a trip, and I said, well, can I come up too? And he said, yeah, sure. So interesting experience. For one thing, not having to exert myself paddling, seeing the river going upstream, which is looks totally different from downstream, and I saw one or two things I'd never seen before, such as that hot stream just above Pipariki, where I knew of it and often wished I could see it. But old Hatrick, he wanted to make a spa of that and get his, in fact, get the government to build a track to it so that his tourists. But the government was a bit cagey on that one. I didn't want to do things for him at their expense. I had done the middle section by a jet boat, and with a jet boat you just go so fast you blink and you miss the part that you wanted to look at. So going up by Baldy's boat, it was a lot slower and you could look at things. Whereas in a canoe, it was sometimes hard to stop because you couldn't tie up and get out because the bank was too steep. Whereas with the riverboat, you could just nose in and keep his engine running, and someone could get up and tie up, and then you could get out and go and look at the whatever it was. And it was just nice seeing all the scenery and the places on the way up. But I was wishing the river was deeper so that you could do this trip in the summertime, because we just had to be wrapped up against the cold all the time. Prior to the 1890s to 1900s, if you wanted to go from Auckland to Wellington or vice versa, you had to go by ship. During those years, the government was pushing on with the railway from Auckland down to Taumarunui. So by 1903, you had railheads at Taumarunui and at Whanganui. And Hatrick saw his chance. He got special boats made with the screw in the tunnel so that they didn't project below the bottom of the boat. Otherwise, you'd be scraping up the shingle as you went through some of those rapids. As it was, the boat sort of slid over lots of shingle banks. So he had a houseboat built at Taumarunui and floated that down by the Whanganui River. And then if you were going up to Auckland, you would go by rail to Whanganui, by a riverboat to Pipariki, and a smaller boat up to the houseboat, and then an even smaller one from the houseboat right up to Taumarunui. Then get back on the train and go up. That was for a lot of people preferable to going by ship. It was a much slower method of travel by those days, horse and cart or walking. And so if you're going upriver, spending 3 days just sitting down watching the scenery, that would have just been normal. I mean, it would have been just as slow going by stagecoach from one place to another. Pipariki was a fairly major township on the river, and certain Mr. Huddle had an accommodation house there. Hatrick took it over later on and extended it and turned it into a magnificent hotel. So all that remains is a foundation and a flight of stairs. The local iwi set about constructing a new hotel up there, but the project ran into difficulties and it stalled. I've actually been down the river something like 30 times now. As I was concerned, the first few trips it was just the scenery, and then after that, I won't say the scenery started to pall, but I felt there must be more to interest myself in on the river, so I started to get interested in the history. And so I've read what has been written about it and spoken to people who know these things. What does disturb me is these people who get in the river, they paddle down from the Hatrick River, Whakaharo, down to Pipariki, and they've done the river. On one occasion I was up on the bank looking at the Pururoto cave, and some canoeists were going by and said, "Hey, come over here and have a look." And they weren't interested, they just paddled straight on. The government set up the River Trust, whose job it was to clear the channel, build retaining walls here and there to direct the current and to generally keep the river clear for navigation, which involved a lot of pulling of snags out and dragging a harrow through the shallow parts to pull the shingle from the shallow part to a deeper part. Up at Tari Pokiori Rapid, a slip came down 1890 and it blocked the river, and what it left once the river started to break through was almost a waterfall. It was a very difficult place to get through, and so it was the River Trust's job to clear the channel. Well, they tried pulling boulders out from the bottom of the slip, and it just carried on slipping. So nothing more to do, no other way to do it but to tackle the other banks. So they cut something like about 5 metres off a bank, which ranged, I suppose, from about 5 metres up to about 15 metres, something like that. And they cut right back and they slowed it down. It's largely a mudstone, compressed grains, very fine grains of ground up rock, finer than flour, and it's just compressed. It was formed under the sea with just all these debris sort of floating down through the ages, and it just compressed on its own weight, so it's a rock, but it's very soft, and the streams, when they come in, they cut their way straight down. They don't spread out with a broad bank as in a lot of other streams. It's very young, it's only a few million years.
My grandfather came up here after the First World War, and he took up a section up the valley here, about 7 miles up, and he farmed there till 1942, till the government kicked them out and wouldn't maintain the roads. But I come down here probably twice a year on the horses and ride down the old road here, cross the river up here a bit out of sight, and ride round the valley here and swim the horses over the river and go down to Whanganui Lodge and stay there for the night and then ride back again.
It's just nice to look at and to know that's the way it was before the Pakeha came. All the varying shades of green are nice, the different types of trees, from the ferns right up on the top ridges. You've got the beeches and you've got rewa, honeysuckle growing everywhere. There's lots of different varieties, and then when you go along the track to the bridge to nowhere, well, you can see all the second growth, which is largely broadleaf, but it'll turn into the mature forest tree later. In fact, back in the 1950s, coming into the Mangapurua landing, you could see 2 different distinct shades of greenery. So when you stand on the bridge to nowhere, you look around and you see trees everywhere. But when they built the bridge, there's pasture everywhere, with sheep grazing. That's hard to imagine.
The purpose of settling the people from the First Ward, among whom was my father, Pat Mowat, but he got very close to the concrete bridge on the other side of the stream, and his brother, Trixie, back from Egypt, Palestine, front, along with 35 other settlers, soldier settlers. Dad never stopped talking about the valley. He was here for 20 years, 1919 or 1938. he always very optimistic about the place, and well, he hung on as long as he could. And to the north of the Mangapura again, the valley of the Tautarikapa was settled by about another 10 settlers in there, and we will come in about another 2 or 3 hours, we'll come to that outlet.
I've made it! Look at this beautiful scenery, it's just glorious. See?
There is a body called the Friends of the Whanganui River. It was started about 1989. Back in those days we had the chief of the Whanganui Chronicle. He was taken down the river and he said, oh, this is lovely scenery, I must write up the story about it for the paper. And so there were innumerable articles written by him, and he wrote some books. And then he learned about the Bridge to Nowhere, and he was fascinated by the story of the settlers in the Mangapura Valley. So he wrote that book of his, The Bridge to Nowhere, as well as a number of other picture books about the area. And they decided, well, there's a lot of interest here, let's get a lot of like-minded people who, as it were, fans of the river, and we'll form an ad hoc group. And it's been like that ever since. And they produced an annual, and they've got stories about life on the river and happenings and things like that. Well, I've been contributing since about 2000. I've now taken over the editorship of it. I'm still digging out stories about what happened, getting an appreciation of what it was like in the early days, living on the river, the Maoris, warfare on it, all the various fights that took part. All sorts of funny things have happened, we've recorded them, and there's an awful lot still to be found out about it.
The river takes a very pronounced bend here now to the northeast, the Whanganui River to the northeast, and it was a major crossing place for Maori in the old days. This is the very start of what was called the Taumata Mahui track. All the produce out of the Whangamomina and the Tongarako came this way. The Whangamomina confluence was too silty for the boats to actually operate. Yeah. We're fortunate all round today, I think, really, in so many people with so many river connections here. And Leonie, of course, a member of the Murphy family, who are pioneer people in Whangamomina, and she's going to just say a little.
Gus Murphy, which was my mum's uncle, who settled there as a returned serviceman and took up a block of land, and his brother Bill helped him, who was my grandfather, and they farmed there till they walked out, similar to Mangapura.
was a very significant time for him reaching Whakahura, because that was the first time he'd made that journey since recovering from his stroke. I think after seeing someone that has gone through something like a stroke and being so disabled and life had become out of his control, and after working so hard to go through recovery and just seeing Baldy back out there, he was home. He was home. We're both very overwhelmed by the whole thing. It was just awesome, absolutely awesome, and I'm starting to really realise just how much the hour is meant to Baldy, and bringing tourists and helping the people of the river benefit from us as well. Baldy has been going up to the Blue Duck station for many years, right back to his canoeing days and when he had the Adventurer 1. And Richard and Dan Steele have always been very supportive of Baldy. This trip we have done to Whakahura, they actually came down by jet boat to see the boat coming up the river.
No, you're 21, remember?
Their hospitality is absolutely awesome. Beautiful food. They come down and meet us at the boat and take all our luggage up to the lodges.
They're change ocean.
Bo and I with you to be on one of those walkers and go up there and come down. Mihi ki manuhiri. Ko te manuhiri o te Whanganui River. Kia ora to all you visitors of the river. And it's been beautiful to meet you all. There's so many people off this river on this journey. And well, I enjoyed it, and I thank you very much for taking us into your fold, into your hapu of the weekend, onto your waka. And kia ora tātou. Hei! Renga Pakeia! Ka mate, ka ora, ka ora. Ka mate, ka ora. Tēnei te tangata huringa ngai te kemo whakawhaitei tēra. Ai pane, arai pane, kai pane whaitei tēra. Hei! I acknowledge by our two friends here, who I know so very, very well. Whakapapa, very, very well. So good, Baldy said, Taiwan, Tieke, yesterday. Absolutely great to have the people of the river on board. Everybody acknowledgement of Baldy. He's had a long, long history on the river. Canoe time, the waka, motorised waka. And I don't know anybody who actually knows his buddy better than he does. It was really great that after he's had this buddy bit of a hard time and stroke and whatever, that he's back with full confidence on the hour. This is a great time to introduce Baldy to say something himself. So away you go, Captain. Yeah. That's good, Trixie. Way to go, Baldy. Way to go, Baldy.
Yeah, this is my better half.
Of course. On the boat, Baldy is in charge. On land, guess who it is?
I don't know, I heard him stick his head in that galley down there and he got the hell out of there pretty quick. Had a quick look at the engine room on the way out. Just cruised, he didn't cruise, he got out of there.
And I just want to thank all you guys for being part of this journey. It has been awesome. You know, it has been an awesome journey. Thank you.
Oh, I just want to say thanks to all you guys for coming on this fun journey.
Oh yeah.
That's about it. And it's good to have you fellas. Thanks very much for your thoughts.
To Baldy!
Yeah.
To Baldy!
I was a wee bit embarrassed about the intention, but I was very humbled by everyone being behind me. It was a nice feeling knowing that you had all these people sort of rooting for you. I knew I was amongst mates and the pressure was off me a wee bit. They were all pleased that I was going up, pleased that I was driving and I was back. Sort of like going home, getting into Mum's fridge.
Hey, it's good to be back home again. And sometimes this old farm feels like a long lost friend. And hey, it's good to be back home again. He said,
I was pretty nervous nervous going up, and I knew I was a bit sort of rusty, you might say. After I'd recovered from the stroke, and I didn't really know how I was going to go, and it was good to get up there and sort of prove to myself that I'm going to be okay and I can do this, and I can keep doing
It's
it.
your kisses that I long for, and it's your love that lights my way. Happiness is all you bring me. Well, it's the sweetest thing I know of, just spending time with you. And it's the little things that makes this old house a home. Yeah, like this fire softly burning, oh, there's supper on the stove that's kind, and the light in your eyes keep me warm. Sing it with me now. Hey, it's good to be back home again. Yes, it is. And sometimes